partners, and welcome to our second Salesforce training. Today we are going to be going in depth with our just recently launched Salesforce Sales Cloud integration. You may remember Pavel.
Hi guys.
You'd say hello. He did our Salesforce overview back in December, so welcome back. He actually just ran into the office, so he can tell you about adventures with Bay Area traffic.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. That's supposed to be my joke.
He might be a little winded. All right, moving to our first slide. So just a reminder about confidentiality. So the Sales Cloud integration has already launched. So anything that's written in our external documentation, such as our help center, our integration guides, that's not confidential because we're already sharing it. But any other information that we provide in this training that isn't otherwise externally available, please be aware it is confidential. We're giving it to you because your partner's under NDA. So particularly things about the roadmap for the Salesforce integration or version 2, or any other extra tidbits we share. If you're not sure if something's confidential, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm always happy to clarify. All right, with that, I will let Pavel actually kick it off as we move into our integration overview.
Hi guys, so we're gonna do it a bit differently this time. We're gonna split and share, I think. So I'm gonna go through some parts of the first pieces, and then Cynthia is gonna kick into the next one. And then we're gonna probably flip it around again.
Yep.
Okay, so just to give you a general overview, as you remember from the previous training, this is the Salesforce Sales Cloud integration, which means it's an integration between GA360 and the Salesforce Sales Cloud platform versus the Salesforce Marketing Cloud platform that also is work in progress on our site. With this particular launch that happened on the 17th of January, which is just 2 weeks ago, we have launched the first capability you can see on the screen, which is actually the import of offline conversions in a more standardized way, with a second version of the integration, much more robust, with the ability to import user attributes, product data, optimize to lifetime value, and many, many others, launching later on. Well, we can discuss it in a second. So we're gonna focus today on the V1, which is the import of offline conversions, which has been announced just 2 weeks ago, and you have seen it on our blogspot. So just as a quick reminder from the previous session we had, there is a lot of capabilities that this already V1 of the integration enables. The core one that we have focused on is the import of offline conversions. But thanks to the import of offline conversions, you can actually action on the data in many, many other ways. I'm not supposed to be knocking on it. Thank you so much. There's a guy behind the camera that you don't see, but I see him. He's actually probably very angry with me because I was here like last minute. I literally ran into it, as Cynthia said. So I'll get letters for it, right? Yeah, I will, of course. Anyway, okay. So let's move back to the topic. So it may seem like a little thing that we are just importing the standardized offline conversions, even though it was, trust me, a lot of work that took a lot of time. But point being, there is a lot of capabilities that we have actually enabled around it with a few other launches that actually allow you to action on that data. And in particular, the core ones is the first one, which is you are able to export those offline conversions, stages, pipelines, into AdWords and double-click search and enable bidding on them, which is like, let's call it the basics, the essentials, but extremely powerful. That way you would be bidding to an actual sale that drives revenue versus a lead submitted online that may never actually come through. And the core ones that our customers so far have rated as the highest functionality and highest actionability is actually the ability to create an audience segment out of qualified leads or even sales, export it to AdWords or, for example, DBM, and create similar audiences out of it. That functionality in particular allows you to basically acquire lookalikes, which is high-value prospects. Users of similar traits, which are much more likely to convert. Of course, you have to bid on them higher, for example, on search when the intent is. And then you're actually able to make sure that when you pay for a user, that user not only submits the lead, but also ultimately converts. And on top of that, of course, there will be the third one, which you can see there, which is the capability of exporting those goals into Attribution 360. And that feature, it unfortunately has not launched yet, but it's coming by end of Q1, which means Google Attribution 360 to be able to ingest this type of Salesforce data. Still me, right? So we had two amazing customers, Rackspace and Carbonite, who actually got the preview of this integration under our beta. And as FYI, both customers have been very, very thrilled by the integration. They have not been able yet to fully create, we're not able to create a full case study with results and so on and so forth. It was just too early in the process. That being said, as you can see, I'm not going to read through the table. It just makes no sense. But first of all, the core thing that the customers are excited about is they will no longer have to reconcile the data from online and offline environment in a different platform. They can actually do it all together now in GA. And foremost, they will be able to compare the performance of those different online marketing channels and how they actually lead to the sale, which is where the revenue is generated, versus to just a simple lead submission. And ultimately, as you know, many customers have done this type of an integration. Well, not maybe many, let's not stretch it that much, but some customers have done it in the past in a custom way, and that takes a lot of time. So this actually does save customers a lot of time to be able to set it up and import the data ongoingly in a timely manner.
I'm sure a lot of our partners have done custom integrations here.
Oh yes, yeah, we heard from you quite actually loud and clear during the summit back in September. Okay, so we had Rackspace, Carbonite, and I think with regard to Rackspace and Carbonite, we're actually gonna have a much bigger case study, but let's see how things go along the way. And just to give you a preview of the general timeline, so we have already launched fully V1 on the 17th of January. It's available to everyone. There's no rollout timeline or anything like that. I actually hate that process. So whenever we launch something, we launch it to everyone going forward. I'll have to talk to the GA team. And then we're actually already working on V2. The good news, we have UI already quite done, let's call it that way. There's still a lot of work on the backend side, but we expect the V2 to launch fully to all of you guys early in Q2 with a beta whitelist happening hopefully by mid-end of March. As soon as that happens, Cynthia will definitely work with you to allow you to actually sign your customers up or yourself if you use Salesforce as well. And I can hint at what's coming in V2. We already discussed in the previous one, but I can actually now share more details as we have already started with that. I think it's your turn, right?
Actually, this is still you.
Still me. Oh, yeah, there you go. So what is the GA 360 Salesforce Sales Cloud integration actually all about? There are two aspects to it. One, you're linking the Salesforce Sales Cloud account into GA, and you're importing data from Salesforce Sales Cloud, which is not only offline conversions, but sales pipeline, selected sales pipeline stages. For example, lead qualified, sales qualified, and so on and so forth. You select them and you import them into Google Analytics in form of measurement protocol hits. And the second part is actually the merger of that data, which is the join of that data to the pre-existing online standard web hits that GA already has, that you can later on leverage it for reporting, segmentation, and remarketing. In other words, this integration allows you to ingest offline type of data with GA in a manner that offline data becomes like online standard web hits with no differentiation. I think that's it. We can skip the second part because actually we just discussed it, sort of. Still me?
Yep.
Ah, still me. Okay. I forgot where yeah, sorry guys, the traffic and stuff, I blame it on that. So now let's deep dive into how the actual flow looks like, which is what are the steps that you need to take to make this integration work. So on this one, you see 5 steps. There is the 6th step, which you can see actually, which is externality. And the way it works is the user comes to a website. The user can come from any type of a source. That source will automatically be captured by GA, as you know. The user does the research and so on and so forth and comes to the lead form. The moment the user submits the lead form, magic needs to happen. Yeah, that statement sounds a bit weird, but something needs to happen. And on form submission, specific data needs to be passed into Salesforce Sales Cloud. And that data is basically 3 types of variables. GA client ID, the Google Analytics anonymous cookie ID called client ID in GA, and or user ID, which means you can also stitch to it the user ID, the GA user ID, if you use it on your website and if there is a value behind it. But please treat GA client ID as mandatory. Cynthia will actually talk about it, I think, later on, or still it's going to be me either way. Yeah, there you go. And the foremost one, which is the last one, and this is also required, is the GA tracking ID that you can see at the bottom of the screen. The GA tracking ID, which is the ID of the account, also needs to be passed into Salesforce in a pre-encoded manner. Once those identifiers are passed into Salesforce together with the lead form submission, the magic happens on Salesforce side then, which means the user goes through the sales pipeline. They are contacted via the call center. The salesperson interacts with the lead, converts that lead to an opportunity, for example, and ultimately, if the lead is won and closed, the opportunity is converted into revenue. The last part is, once that implementation and stages are completed, you define in the GA UI the import of the GA data, of the Salesforce data, which means you define the intervals as to how often the selected by you sales pipeline events are supposed to be imported to GA, and from which of your Salesforce accounts, if you have multiple. In most cases, it's a single account. We'll go through the details of that in a second. All of that is standardized and it's imported by default in a very simple manner. The only thing that you need to actually do is to do that implementation, the first stage, and then the linking itself in the GA UI. Once the data is there, that data is treated as standard GA heats, like web heats, and you can use it in any way you can use today's GA heats in Google Analytics, as I have already mentioned before. I think that's pretty clear, so we can actually move on. And now we're going to have a video.
Yeah, I'm going to try to bring this up full screen as I play it, but it's a little tricky to do. So bear with me. Here we go.
So on the screen, you can actually see, once the implementation is completed, how the setup looks like. I know it's pretty fast.
Yeah, and I'll actually walk through this.
Later on, exactly, yeah, exactly. But in general, the setup is at the data import level. So you create a new data import data set. And once you create it, there is a flow of 2 steps where you need to first name it and then create the data source. In this particular case, the data source is the Salesforce Sales Cloud. And Cynthia is going to explain all of that in a second. Here you can see a demo site that actually shows you that, well, the lead is submitted. So the user does the research and now submits the form. And once the form is submitted, that data will show, there you go, in Salesforce Sales Cloud. Then the salesperson can actually, well, interacts with the lead, which means calls them back, closes the lead, transfers it into an opportunity. You'll see it in a second. There you go, convert to opportunity. This is the old Salesforce Sales Cloud UI. You should know that Salesforce launched a new UI for Sales Cloud called the Lightning, which is actually really nice, as opposed to this one. And then you can see actually once the data is imported, the data shows up in GA. Please mind that it can take up to 24 hours for that data to actually show up, though it is attributed correctly to the time of import, of course.
Great, and if that was a little fast, we will send the deck out afterwards as well, so you can watch it as many times as you need.
Correct.
Okay.
Still me, yeah. So there's a few things that you need to be mindful of, and to be very honest, based on the beta testers that we have interacted with, that has been the core challenge, which is the permissions setup. In GA, the core requirements is you need to be an edit type of a user, which means that you need to be able to create a new data import and configure it. That's standard edit permissions. On the Salesforce Sales Cloud side, there's a few more things that you need to do. It's an enterprise platform, very robust, very powerful one. So there are additional access permissions that you need to make sure that are granted to the user that will be performing the linking. To clarify, the user that will be performing the linking does not have to be a GA user. It can be someone else that stands next to you that just logs in during the data import configuration into the Salesforce Sales Cloud UI and then never, of course, does it again. The core important things is that you need to have those permissions assigned for the lead opportunity objects, as well as the field history has to be enabled. The easiest thing that you can do it with is basically to ask a system admin to do that linking as a one-off. That admin definitely has all the permissions. If that's not the selected choice by your Salesforce representative or your customer's Salesforce representative, they should create a dedicated user, for example, and grant them all the permissions as listed. The important thing is, please make sure that the person that is performing the linking is not a sales representative, because if a sales representative has access only to, for example, leads coming from a single region, let's say it's EMEA, which means that access is limited, even though they will have access to all the other fields and so on and so forth as per the requirements. The problem is that only those leads will be imported that that person has access to. So it could rarely happen that the sales representative would be doing a cross-platform linking, but that's actually something that is worth keeping in mind. This is also listed in our Help Center article. The linking is at property level, and Cynthia can actually guide you later on through how to filter things out and how to work around some of the restrictions that are there. And as the last part, this is the last one, right? Yeah, I think so.
I believe so.
This is actually the core part, is choosing the identifier. So as you know, GA operates in two types of identity spaces today, which is the GA client ID, anonymous cookie ID, that comes with the first visit of the user to the site per environment. And environment, I call it browser, device, and so on and so forth. And then the user ID, which is not cookie-based, which is assigned by the owner of the site, that pushes that ID into the GA heats in form of an additional parameter. Those two spaces are called unknown client ID and known, which is user ID. That's when you need to identify with the user. In general, our requirement, and I'm going to be very blunt, is that at least one of those has to be present. Both have to be configured. You can see that in the Help Center. It's actually listed very clearly. So you have to create the custom field in Salesforce for both of those IDs, but only one of them has to have a value, which means it can be either client ID or user ID. Now, that's the official manner. Now, another official thing is that, let's be very honest, client ID is mandatory and user ID is optional for a simple reason. Salesforce Sales Cloud is a sales CRM where the customers, the majority of their customers are most likely to be lead generators. That means that a lead is a whole browsing behavior of that user on the site before that user gets identified by you upon lead submission. That browsing is anonymous, which means you want to interact and act on that browsing behavior. For example, when you create segmentation. That behavior then is actually keyed on the client ID, not user ID. So the client ID is actually the carrier of all the most valuable information until the lead submission, where you are actually finally able for the first time to identify that user. Given some of the user ID specifications and challenges, restrictions, and so on and so forth, that's why client ID is the one that you should be using at all times, and user ID is the one you can additionally use if you actually use it on your site. For example, if after lead submission, users log into your site, which means you can authenticate them, which means you can assign the user ID ongoingly. So long story short, do the client ID. That's actually how Help Center lists it. And then optionally, you can also choose to push the user ID into Salesforce Sales Cloud if it exists and if you have it implemented.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. I'll take over from there, and I'm also going to take this moment to remind everyone that if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A. We'll take Q&A at the very end. We should have a good amount of time for it. So.
Yep.
So to walk you through the actual implementation, which you saw in the video earlier, so this is a more slowed down verbal walkthrough. So to create the actual Salesforce data import, you're going to open up the property that you want to link to Salesforce Sales Cloud. Go to the middle column, because that's where all the property information is. Go to data import at the very bottom, as I'm sure you all know already, and click the big red create button. From there will be an option for a CRM data, Salesforce dataset type, so you'll select that one. This is only going to be available in GA360 accounts, of course, since this is a 360 only feature. So if you're looking in a standard account and don't see it, that's expected. From there, you'll need to configure your data source details. So first step, kind of an obvious one, name and save your data set. So for example, Salesforce offline conversions would be an appropriate name. You'll customize it. By default, it's going to be set to import from salesforce.com. So you can keep that value, press continue. And then the third step, you need to create Salesforce Sales Cloud authorization. You can actually create multiple authorizations. So if you do have credentials to multiple Salesforce Sales Cloud accounts, you can set multiple up and that won't be any issue. You'll just save multiple sets of credentials. As you saw in the video earlier, once you walk through this step, you'll get a Salesforce pop-up to log you in. And then upon authentication, it'll automatically close and the linking will be completed. So then you officially have your data source set up and your linking complete. So the next step after that, you'll need to import the lead and or opportunity milestones from Salesforce. So you can actually import both standard or default lead and opportunity milestones as well as custom ones. So we have some examples in the screenshot of the types of milestones you might import, such as closed converted, closed not converted, variety depending what you have set up on the Salesforce side.
As a FYI, actually, most of your customers definitely use custom stages, as Cynthia said. They will be listed there as well on top of the default ones as soon as they are configured in Salesforce Sales Cloud.
The final step to setting up the data import is to set the data source schedule. So you'll have two options, either hourly or daily. We recommend hourly, and I think that's what most people would probably prefer.
And also, as a FYI, actually, we're going to be removing the daily option just to avoid, because there's an impact on attribution as to how you import and in what intervals you import those heats. So yeah, select hourly and every single 1 hour. That's the recommended way.
Perfect. So definitely recommend hourly then. All right, so next section I'm also walking through, which is verifying your setup, that it works properly. So to make sure it works, go back into data import at the bottom of the property column again, and on the right side under action, you'll have a link for manage uploads. So you'll click into that for your recently created Salesforce Sales Cloud integration data import. From here, as you saw in the video, you can click Fetch Now to test and see if there's any potential setup errors. And if any occur, you will see them under the status column for whichever import actually threw an error. So we do have an example here at the bottom. We'll try to point you in the right direction of where to fix this. So a common example you might see that we have here is that things could be misconfigured on the Salesforce side. So if you don't have one of the 3 required custom fields set up properly, then we won't be able to import the data, but we will highlight that that's the issue if that needs to be fixed on the Salesforce side.
It's actually worth mentioning to what Cynthia said that we have created a full self-debugging type of a service, which means whenever you point there, you're going to get the error description, and there will be all the details provided as to why the data is not being imported. There is one exception there, which is actually not listed here, but I think we did add it to the Help Center, which is server error. When you see that, just give it some time. Upon first linking, it takes time before the token is the token actually kicks in on the Salesforce side. So there may be a lag of 5-10 minutes. Just refresh the Fetch Now, and then the data should start flowing in smoothly. That's just a lag and nothing more than that.
That's a good tip. Yep. And the final note on here, if you see in this screenshot where the 3 is, it'll also tell you whether your Salesforce data set is scheduled for automated imports or not, which I imagine most people would want that. The other thing you can do is, even if you aren't getting any errors, if the data is not populating in your reports how you expect, or just things aren't working the way you had planned for them to, you could actually download the measurement protocol hit and see what that looked like, check if something's missing. If you see the screenshot here, we can see there's a user ID associated with this hit, but no client ID. And as Pavel was mentioning earlier, we strongly recommend having a client ID for things to really work in the best way possible. So here there's no error because there is the user ID, but you could actually look at the hit and see that something is missing that you would probably want there. So if that's the case, then you can troubleshoot, figure out if the site is not sending the client ID to Salesforce as expected, work that out with your web developer. The final way you could also verify that your setup is working properly is by looking in the reporting. Imagine most partners are very familiar with this approach of troubleshooting. You could actually go into the top events report under behavior and apply a secondary dimension. So you could actually look for that event label associated with your lead or opportunity milestones that are being imported from Salesforce. Another, I thought, kind of fun little tip here, because I did not know this, was the Salesforce hits will have a data source of SFSC. So if you've ever added the secondary dimension for data source, you know that Universal Analytics is marked as web, app is marked as app, and others are typically not set. For example, I believe measurement protocol hits are typically marked as not set. And also actually so is GA.js if you're still using the legacy code on your site. But so that will also help with the troubleshooting just in case you have events of the same name being sent from the tracking code rather than being imported from Salesforce. You could confirm that the data source actually is Salesforce because we will indicate that. Final note here is since the Salesforce linking occurs at the property level, when you set up this linking in this data import, it will import to all views under that property. So if that is not something that you want, maybe you have some people have access to a view who you don't want to see your Salesforce data, we would recommend setting up a filter at that view level and excluding by the event category. So you would just exclude, the exact events you're importing from Salesforce for that view. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it back over to Pavel for our final section before we move into Q&A.
So guys, we're not gonna do it live, of course, but we're gonna guide you through how you can actually test the integration end to end and create your own demo of some sorts. We're not gonna go through the web development piece because that's logical. You just need to create a lead form and then link it to Salesforce, which means populate the form IDs with correct parameters and fetch the client ID and push it into that form. But that you can do, and I'm sure that most of you do already, have done already with your customers on general lead type of integrations. We're gonna actually focus on how you can test it out. And the steps are actually pretty simple. Every single person can create a Salesforce developer account by going to that link and just signing up for the account. That account can be used for testing purposes. Once you do that, there are a few configuration steps that are also listed in our Help Center article. So the first one is, once you log in, you need to go to the object manager and you need to configure the two objects, which is lead and opportunity, and corresponding fields with it. So under each one of those objects, you need to create the custom field. So under the lead and opportunity object, you need to create 3 custom fields. Each field should be called GA client ID, user ID, and each field. Every one of those fields should have its corresponding name, which is GA client ID, GA user ID, and GA track ID. Those names have to be exactly listed as you can see on the screen, which means all capitalized. And then the API names for them will automatically be populated with __C. Please do not change that part. As you can see, on top of that, there is the length. You need to select the default length of 255. It will be there, so you just need to click Save. Once you do that, you need to replicate it for the opportunity object. Like I mentioned earlier, you can populate for the client ID and user ID. You can push the values into either one of those. We, of course, say that client ID is the mandatory one. But both fields have to be present in Salesforce for this integration to work, even if one of them is empty. The next part is you need to select we need to actually enable the field history tracking. And I'm not going to relate to that, but you can actually do that based on the description here. We're going to send the deck so you can actually browse through it and go there directly step by step. It takes a few seconds. And the last part is you need to map the fields. The way Salesforce Sales Cloud works is whenever a user or a contact is moved across the sales pipeline, which moves, for example, moves from a lead submitted to lead converted and so on and so forth, and then opportunity, different stages, marketing qualified, sales qualified, and sales. That means that there is a funnel that is happening. To make the transition between a lead object and an opportunity object, you need to do the mappings, which means you need to make sure that the data from the lead object is fully transferred into the opportunity object. And that data means basically on top of the standard stuff like first name, last name, which is by default enabled, we're talking here about the custom fields, which is you need to make sure that when the lead is submitted online and is nested, that data is nested in the lead object. Once it's transferred into the opportunity, the client ID, user ID, and tracking ID go together with it. And that's basically that action, which means you need to map the fields in the GA UI. You do it for the lead object only. So you go to the section, select the lead object, and then you select opportunity. And in the opportunities for each one of those fields, you create a corresponding custom field from the opportunity object. You can see it in the top right corner. You can see the lead fields on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have the opportunity fields that you can map to it. Once you save that, the data will be flowing in smoothly. And yes, and that's basically it. Then one thing actually I can add here is once you do all of that, you can actually create in the Salesforce UI your own leads. Like literally just select create a new lead, fill it out, put random values and do the integration with GA360. And that way you will be able to see the data flowing in and test it end to end whether the setup is correct. This setup together with the linking with GA, as long as you created the Salesforce developer account, it literally takes maybe 10 minutes maximum The one piece that, of course, is missing is the lead form, the website integration, which is the, well, longer term that the developer needs to help you with. But yeah, other than that, this particular setup and creating custom leads and doing the import end-to-end is actually pretty easy, quick, and fast.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you, Pavel. So that takes us into our Q&A time. So let me take a look. I'm excited to see how many questions we have. Quite a few. Last time when Pavel presented was definitely our record, at least for me, for questions.
Maybe let's not beat it this time. I don't know if we have 28 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so first question, question from Jeho. Can we also see GA client ID on Salesforce Sales Cloud platform?
Yes, so the answer is actually simple. So whenever you create the custom field, actually I could show, can I actually go back? I want to show you something. Oh, actually, I can show you something. So, can I show you? No, it's in the demo. You remember in that, sorry, can you go back?
Yeah, I'll bring the question back.
Thank you, sorry. So you remember that video demo thingy? There was that Salesforce UI, right? And you saw the lead. When you click on that lead, which was at that time my name, Paweł Matkowski, there were all the fields described there, like first name, last name, email, phone number from all the lead submission, and also the custom fields that you create. So if you, well, you have to, created the GA client ID custom field, user ID, and tracking ID, it will be there under the contact data, and well, the data will be injected together with the form into it. So 100% yes, that's the custom fields, and it's listed in the lead and opportunity objects within the UI, so anyone can see them. That's why you can also verify whether they have been passed from the lead form to Salesforce correctly.
Okay, great. Let's check this one more time. Although actually, I think on RLSA, this window has been updated. But here's a question from Manpreet. As hits are sent to GA via measurement protocol, are the remarketing limitation for double-click tools, RLSA, GDN, etc., still the same as that for previous custom CRM integrations performed via measurement protocol? Example, for RLSA, the past 6 hours of data will be included in your audience. However, reminder, if you attended the January training, we actually just increased that from 6 hours to 24 hours. But
so
I'll let you answer this.
Yes, so actually, well, but that's a good point. So you remember when at the beginning I pointed at something else, which is that we have launched this Salesforce integration, but also other launches took place that, that enable and facilitate actionability on that data. So actually, when I looked into the Salesforce integration early, when we're actually we're structuring it, designing it, so on and so forth, the things that I discovered was, for example, this one, 6-hour window on the RLSA, which would completely, this integration would be completely useless for a simple reason. There is no way a lead can be submitted online. There is an interaction happen and the data is imported within such short windows. So with that, actually, we have launched, me and the team have actually launched that extension, which is 6 hours to 30 for RLSA. Now, as you know, also we have 10 days to 30 for GDN. So with regard to answer your question, there is now the 30-day window, and it applies to measurement protocol imports as well, which facilitates this type of integration. Just to clarify, as much as we have enabled it with this integration very much in mind, it also applies to measurement protocol hits sent outside of this particular Salesforce integration. So all of that is now extremely facilitated, like the use case I mentioned around acquiring high-value prospects, so similar audiences out of RLSAs and so on and so forth. Now with the 30 days, you can actually make all of that happen, which is actually pretty awesomely amazing.
Great. That was a lot of good news, I think, for
it was actually, the same for attribution. There's lots of changes to actually facilitate that. So like I said, we focused not only on the integration itself. I actually just sent an email to our big people that we focused on the use cases to enable customer use cases versus actually just launching another data import functionality, which was actually very important.
It's great. I love having product managers give all this context, some behind the scenes stuff I didn't know.
Being too honest, right?
Yeah.
Too honest.
I think everyone appreciates that. So here's an anonymous question. I suspect this one we might not be able to answer live, but I just want to check if maybe you do have some insight. So we have a client who has set this up already, but the events are generating new sessions with 0% bounce rate and 30-minute session time, skewing overall site engagement stats. Is this expected, and how can we avoid this? This sounds like it might be a very specific situation.
Plus, also, it doesn't sound correct with the 30-minute session times. So as you have seen, and Cynthia actually showed it to you, there was the measurement protocol hit on the screen. We append the NI equals 1 parameter, which makes those those heats non-interaction type. That means that they don't impact bounce rate, or such as, for example, metrics as the session duration, and they should not be skewing the session time. Not to mention they are important as events, so they don't impact page views either. There should be no impact on any of those metrics. The NI is like, you should file, maybe reach out to us, but we have tested. This should not be happening.
Sounds like it might be something very specific to this client setup, and perhaps it's even coming from something
else
separate, from the Salesforce Sales Cloud integration. If it's a GA360 account, you can reach out to GA360 to support. Or if this client has AdWords, you also can get in touch with AdWords support, and they will support analytics issues as well.
Yeah. So the 0% bounce rate sounds right? Because it doesn't impact bounce rate. So there's no bounce rate on those heats. But there's none, not zero.
Although these are new sessions.
And 30-minute session times, that's definitely not happening. So something's wrong there.
So I think to answer the question, we can say it's not expected, and this is probably a very specific situation that you'll need someone to look into.
But please file it, because if there is a bug of some sorts, which I'm not sure what it could be, then we should investigate ASAP.
Yes.
Also, it would be nice to know which client it is, for a simple reason. Their customers are still enabling it. It takes time, to do the whole deployment, like leading website lead form integration, plus then the integration with Salesforce setup. So I'm actually surprised, because I didn't notice any new customers, or maybe one or two, that have already launched it.
Got it.
Since the launch.
Okay, let's move on. So a series of questions. I think some of these we also answered last time, so I might be able to answer some of them. Will PII information now be available in Google Analytics? So I can answer that one.
Go ahead, yeah.
Our policy will not change with PII, so you have to make sure you're not sending PII from Salesforce. Is that correct answer?
That's correct, but you can't. The integration is standardized. That being said,
good to know.
In V2, and I can hint at that, there's gonna be a really nice UI. You're gonna be able to map fields. So for example, you're gonna be able to set up custom dimensions in GA UI, and then you're gonna have a mapping. You're gonna select custom dimension 1, for example, and then you're gonna select which field from Salesforce you're gonna be able to import. That means one thing, that as you know, in Salesforce, there's hundreds of fields. Some of them are PII. You need to make sure you do not select PII for V2. But we're gonna do a separate training for V2, because it actually enables lots of cool things. So that's later in Q2.
Sounds good. And what version of Salesforce will be supported?
All versions. All versions are supported. API access is enabled on all versions from Salesforce, so yeah.
It's a good news answer. Will source medium be impacted in terms of attribution? How will it populate with the Salesforce integration? I'm assuming that's tied to the client ID.
Yes, that's exactly as Cynthia said. That's 100% tied to the client ID, which means measurement protocol heats are, as you know, by default direct non-source medium, which means that the source medium in the GA reporting and in general will be attributed to the last non-direct source medium, if it such exists, for example, a campaign, within the campaign timeout window, which by default is set as 6 months. Attribution will ingest those heats as source medium direct none. Attribution uses the multi-channel funnel type of an approach. And more on that can come later on. But I assume you're not talking about Google Attribution 360, actually. You're talking about GA attribution. Yes. So in the reports, if there was a previous channel, for example, the best one possible, which is AdWords, Google CPC, then it's going to be attributed to Google CPC if that channel took place for that given CID before that hit was imported. Which, just to answer it in a simple way, even though I'm saying the same thing 3 times, the standard GA attribution modeling applies here, which is direct last non-direct click.
Yep. Great.
If I didn't answer something correctly, I answered correctly. The question is, if I didn't clarify something, feel free to drop another question at the bottom. We're going to get there in a second.
Yep. And this is a good question from Devroth. You mentioned in one of your videos that data is attributed to time of import. Wanted to confirm if the time of conversion would be the time of import or as available in Salesforce.
Yeah, so Devroth, just to answer the question, that is correct. It's going to be attributed to the time of import. So the moment the heat is imported, that's the timestamp it's going to inherit.
So there could be a bit of a lag between when it's available in Salesforce and when it's imported, right?
So actually, to Cynthia's point, that's why you should define hourly imports, because that means that it's going to be close to accurate, let's call it that way. So you need to... I know that there are challenges. I know that there are business models where the time to conversion is sometimes 360 days, especially in the tech industry for software sales, or BIM, even worse. But one thing that you need to be mindful of is the business model that this entire integration applies to. This is lead gen. Salesforce is a lead gen type of a, not fully, but vast majority is lead gen focused. That means that the moment the user does the research and submits the lead, there is an implied, not implied, there is the user's mindset is, okay, I submitted the lead, now I need to wait for someone to contact me, which means the user doesn't do anything else. For the majority of the industries, such as finance, insurance, and so on and so forth, and education, the time between the salesperson interacts with the lead that was submitted is very short, which means there's going to be no attribution skewing, which means the lead is submitted, salesperson actually interacts usually, for example, for finance, it's within minutes sometimes for a cash loan or for a credit loan or for a credit card. The salesperson interacts, the stages already move, and the data is already imported because you have set up hourly imports, which means every single hour the data flows in, which means that there is no, the timestamp was going to be very, very accurate.
Got it. So that actually, I have a question then, and I imagine others are wondering as well, so I think I'll go ahead and ask. So if you had a business model where things moved very quickly and you had multiple milestones occur within an hour, you'd get multiple milestones importing with the same timestamp, would analytics know the order that these are imported in at least?
Yeah, so we're gonna import them in the order that they happen in Salesforce, and then we're gonna. Okay, we're talking about very specific.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a very good question.
Well.
We're gonna import all of them. So if within that hour, 4 things are done, we're gonna import all of them in an order, and also we're gonna, just to be very clear, we're gonna change the timestamp by like 1 millisecond.
Okay.
So to make sure that there is the order is happening. Yes, so that there is actually a sequence. But it's a good question. Thank you, actually.
Okay, good. I think that works. So
it's 1 millisecond.
We'll see what other people think.
As FYI.
Okay. Another question from Manpreet. A brand new lead or opportunity milestone is added in Salesforce within the GA interface. Do you have to relink the Salesforce data or simply edit the existing setup?
A milestone like a stage or status?
Yes, so they've
you can. One. That's a very good question. You can edit the current one. You can change as to what you import like on the spot. The one thing you cannot do today is, of course, you cannot delete a data set. So if you created one, you can disable it, but you can't delete it. So if you wanted to configure a new one because you want to connect to a new account, for example, well, no, that's not a good example because Salesforce, a customer has only one Salesforce account. I know we are used that in GA you can have multiple properties and accounts. That's not how it works with Salesforce. It's a very sophisticated enterprise level software. So you don't. You can edit it and you can select another milestone that has just been created. It's going to be there available for selection instantly.
Yeah, it seems similar to me. If you have ever linked your analytics account to AdWords, you go down and you click the views that you want to import data into. In the same way you would just click the actual milestones you want to import in.
It's in parity with that type of...
Yeah, same kind of UI. Okay, so
good question.
Good question. Okay, so this sounds like it'll depend a little on your configuration, but how will the channel attribution look like? This is referring to in analytics, I assume. If a user converts 6 months later, which channel will receive the credit? So it sounds like this depends on your campaign timeout, right?
Yeah, so this is actually a very good point, and it's
tricky.
So guys, as much as I mentioned, we have tried, trust me, I've spent hundreds of hours on this, to make sure we facilitate all the use cases, like with the remarketing 30 windows for both channels, with attribution launch, with some changes in GA to make sure everything looks smoothly. There is that one piece that you just found out, Zamira. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. I'll have to explain it now on the air.
These are great questions, though, because these are the kinds of things we need to talk about.
Yeah, these are just the challenging one because that's where things are not ideal. I'm trying to be very nice here. Well, actually, no, politically correct. Even though I'm not at all. Okay, so a user submits a lead today. For some of the business models, let's say it's an auto industry. The user submits a lead with a contact form, but buys the car 6 months later. And within those so when that lead is submitted, right, at the moment, let's say Monday, January 1st, that lead is imported automatically from Salesforce to GA if you selected it for import, of course. And that means that it's going to be attributed to the channel that the lead, based on the last non-direct click model, which can be, for example, a paid channel. Now, as 6 months pass by, there are no other stages that are imported, let's say, and then the conversion happens, and that lead is imported again. So if the user has not visited the site from other channels, it will still be attributed based on the same channel that the previous lead, this initial lead submission took place. But if there were other channels that the user interacted with, let's say display ad, and he came over to check out new cars, then yes, that lead, that conversion imported 6 months later will again apply by the last non-direct attribution, which means when it's imported at the time of import, it's going to be attributed to that last channel that the user interacted with when they visited the site. So to your point, the attribution becomes skewed. But at the same time, this is not a justification. I'm not saying I have my own opinion on different models, whether it's Markov or Shapley values or whatever. I do lots of that data science, blah, blah. But point being something else. Please keep in mind that there is always a chance that when the user interacted in the first time, and let's say it was a search ad, there was an intent, he was looking for a car, and then he didn't purchase it, but purchases 6 months later, there is a chance that that additional research that was also a result of a display click because they saw a display ad for a new car impacted that actual conversion. For some of the business models, not all of them, those in-between interactions can impact that ultimate decision that takes place much, much later. Of course, again, we're talking about the attribution landscape, which is much more complex. GA is last non-direct click, as you know. AdWords has already DDA, but it's search only, so technically you can't call it even DDA. And then you have attribution 360, which is the most powerful one, but, well, that's a different topic. So it's going to be skewed a bit, but yes, you will be able still to see it all in multi-channel funnels, all the stages, and when you export it to BigQuery, you would be able to do a custom attribution model based on all the interactions for that given client ID. So you'll be able to see that the conversion, the first one was imported on January 1st, the lead, then conversion, and all the interactions that happen in between. You'll be able to customize your model or you can create your own one.
Yep. So to summarize, I think we can say it's the usual last non-click model that we see in our standard GA reports. You can always look at the multi-channel funnel reports or create custom attribution models there. The only place you're really going to have problems is that the person doesn't come to your site at all for 6 months, right?
Yes, well then the challenge is that after 6 months, the initial channel times out. The timeout window for campaign attribution is 6 months, right? So then it would be imported as direct, and then that means if there is nothing else in between, it would be attributed to direct none this time.
Yeah.
That is another case, actually a very good point.
Yep. Okay, so that's a good question. See, and we are getting towards the last 10 minutes here.
Okay, so I need to answer faster because we actually,
Okay, another one. Will Salesforce data join with all historic hits belonging to that CID, or will it be present in future hits only?
Okay, so the current data is hits and these are conversions. So the conversion attributed to a current timestamp. So that's not even past or future. But to be able to see that conversion in the report, you need to have that timeline of that conversion selected, or that event. You can turn it into conversion a goal later on in GUI. Not sure. So for the V1, this is just a standard hit, so a standard conversion. There is no widening because that's a conversion. That's a hit, not a dimension widening feature. For V2, however, because this is a good point, we're not going to be using the dimension widening feature either. There are reasons why we decided not to. So we're going to be appending the user attributes from Salesforce as additional parameters in the measurement protocol heat. So to answer your question, future only in V2 for the imported user attributes.
Okay. These are really great questions from Manpreet. So.
Well, we can discuss that once we launch.
Okay, another question from Zamira. Can Salesforce pass the revenue back into GA as event value?
That's correct. We're importing opportunity amount today. That's the default one, which means you have to have it in the opportunity amount field. In the opportunity object in the amount field, the one thing I need to mention is most customers have it there. They always actually, it's pretty interesting. In the Salesforce Sales Cloud setup, customers always have the value of the conversion in 3 fields, which is revenue, amount, and expected revenue, and they are almost always the same. The more sophisticated the customer, they can differentiate. We use opportunity amount, but in V2, we're actually gonna enable you to, as I mentioned, you'll be able to create a custom metric and select any of the other fields and just map them to it and say, hey, I want to also import it there. And since it's an event type hit, all of that is imported to event value by default in the current integration that launched. That's a good question though.
Okay, let's see what else we have in here.
Same goes for like predicted scores. Salesforce has them, like lifetime value and stuff. In V2, you will be able to import it and customize it.
So here's a question from Jim regarding the filters. So will data source, for example, filtering by SFSC, be a filterable field in the view filters? Looking in the interface right now, data source is not available as a filter field. But that would actually make sense.
Yeah, so the feature is filed for this one. I'm working on different things on the integrations thingies. So this is more of a GA question. I know that the feature request is filed. I can ask the GA team to see if they can actually make it happen.
Yeah, we can let them know we got this feedback because it feels logical.
You should just raise the priority of it, yeah.
Okay, great question, Jim. Okay, so another question from Jim. You mentioned creating goals from the Salesforce imported events. If these events are not interaction events and therefore not creating sessions, how will the goals, which are session-based, work?
Yeah, so goals can be created out of those events without any issues. Goal is a session-based in the sense that you can have one goal per session, but keep in mind that goal is a hit-based type of a hit-based that relates to the session. So they will work regardless with no issues whatsoever, which means you're gonna set up the goal. It's gonna attribute to the channel based on the last non-direct clip attribution model, and it will be imported backwards to our platforms depending on the attribution model. So I'm not sure.
So I think basically we can just say it will work even if you have a non-interaction event sent from the tracking code on your site right now. You could make a goal out of it.
Customers have been doing that for a long time, like online to store integrations. I've done it. You've seen probably some of the cases from years ago. And whenever you parent NI, it doesn't change anything. It changes how it's treated from a metrics perspective. Well, actually, there is a good point I need to make, and I made it in the previous session. When you create a non-interaction type of a measurement protocol heat, it still creates a session. That's the important thing. Just that session is from a multi-channel type of a view, and from segmentation perspective, it doesn't count. It doesn't increase the counts for the different metrics. That's an important thing. So yeah.
Okay, let me see what else we have. So we have a few more questions now. I'm going to actually stop accepting questions because we're getting towards the end. Okay, so I think we have Zamira looking for a little clarification on the 6 months question. This seems directly related. So if a user converts after more than 6 months and returns to the website via multiple channels, does it mean the last non-direct visit will receive the credit? So
the answer is, if I understand it correctly, 6 months passed. The conversion is still not imported in this case that you're saying, because in the previous one you said that you import it after 6 months. So 6 months passed, the conversion is still not imported. The user returns from multiple channels, let's say display, search, organic, and then the user imports it, the conversion. So we had display, search, organic, so it's going to be attributed to organic, last non-direct clicked. Does that answer your question? Always the rule is simple. We import it at the time, we attribute it to the time of import, and we apply the last non-directly attribution model. We don't change any modeling stuff, which means that it's like a measurement protocol heat. It comes in, it's called direct none. If there is a source, medium, channel that was there before within the 6 months timeout window, we're going to attribute it to it based on the last non-direct heat model. I think that should cover it, hopefully. But let us know if not.
I think it does. If it's still confusing, feel free to reach out to me directly. But basically, it's going to use the same existing models we have now. So the next question is actually a new one. This is a good one. If a user converts, and therefore we get these events imported from Salesforce, and then does not return to the website, well, we have a lot of events with no sessions since it's a non-interaction event. I guess that's a possibility.
Yes, but that is correct. Those will not be counted as sessions in the sense of a counter itself. That being said, I'm trying to understand why does it have an impact on the use cases. 1 second. Converts does not return to the website. We'll have a lot of yes. So if the user does not return, which is sometimes an expected behavior depending on the business model, especially for BIM, then you import those conversions, those events. Those events are NI, so you're gonna see the interaction with the website and those. There's gonna be a lot, but they will be only available in the events report. And if you go to the source medium report, then you're gonna be able to, if you created the goals there, then you're gonna be able to see the goals in the last column, as you have seen in the announcement blog. You actually saw the table of a custom report that customers use the most with this type of online to offline integrations. You will see them, but I'm not sure why that would be bad. And a lot, I don't think a lot is the right word, because it's a good point, but Salesforce, you define which milestones you want to import. Most customers don't define hundreds of milestones. There is a few that they actually use, for example, 6, 8, 10, 12 max, which technically means that yes, if 10 is a lot, then that will be per CID, but it still will stitch to the CID, right? So not sure how to, yeah.
Okay, let's hop back in. We have 2 more questions. So first one from Dan. Since we're importing hits into our GA360 property, is it safe to assume that these will act like all other hits and contribute to our hit thresholds and potentially impact how much we're charged?
That's correct. A hit is a hit. As far as I understand from GA360 billing rules that the sales teams have, every single hit contributes to the thresholds. But just to clarify, keep in mind the volumes. We're not talking here about importing millions of hits. That's not going to happen. These are not page views. These are not standard events. These are conversions and milestones. So bear that in mind. We're not talking here about such volumes that would severely overload your thresholds and so on. That's an important thing to mention. And I know you're probably saying now, but it depends how big the customer is. Actually, it doesn't. So the bigger the customer, there's going to be more, but we're still not talking about the volumes you are used to with page views, events, transaction or whatever else. Sorry, transaction, yeah, but not the same. When you compare, for example, when you go to an e-commerce property and you compare how many hits are generated from page views, events versus e-commerce transactions, check the ratios. Then you're going to see that it's not actually transactions that, I want to see, destroy and overwhelm your thresholds. It's actually the others. Yeah, it's the percentage, right? The e-commerce conversion rate is like, let's say 1%, so that clarifies it. But it's a good question. Yeah, they do contribute to it.
Yep. Okay, and I believe we had, a question from another Dan.
Yeah.
A bit of a niche question. What happens in the rare case that a user's client ID has timed out after 2 years of inactivity, but then submits a hit as part of the integration? So sounds like they don't visit the site for 2 years and then they convert.
Oh, okay, but you said, but then submits a hit.
So I think he means the Salesforce Sales Cloud integration sends a measurement protocol hit.
Well, then the cookie is timed out, but the CID is valid. GA will still see the CID 2 years before. As you know, we don't delete data. The data is historically kept. So there's nothing. Just when the user comes back again, then it's they're going to get a new cookie, right? So maybe I think you're maybe talking about a different scenario. When the user came, submitted a lead, 2 years passed, cookie timed out, the user comes back, so a new cookie is assigned, and then the lead is imported from Salesforce, or like a conversion. Then it will be stitched to that CID from 2 years before, not the current one, right? But it's just same logics as to GA. GA logic, standard logics is a bit of a stretch. GA rules apply here, which means cookie times out, the user returns, they will get a new cookie, but we're still gonna import and attribute it to the client ID that was recorded in Salesforce at the time of lead submission. So 2 years before.
Got it. Definitely an edge case here. Okay, so we're going to stop the Q&A now, and that takes me to my last slide, which is just a request to send feedback. If you have feedback on the training itself or on anything we talked about with the product, please go to this link, which will be much easier to click on when I send out the deck, and you can provide feedback there. If you have product questions similar to what we discussed in the Q&A, please put those to the forums instead, because that way everyone can benefit from seeing the answers to the questions, and I'll try to be aware of any Salesforce questions we see coming in case I can help answer those. But yeah, that's actually it. So anything else you want to add before we close out?
No, but I would be surprised if someone kept their GA cookie for 2 years. I think people delete cookies.
That's true.
Yeah, change devices and stuff.
Laptops break before 2 years.
Exactly, yeah, most of them. That being said, I'll probably see some of you guys in New York at our America's Partners Conference. I think it's somewhere end of February,
February 22nd.
Yes, or 3rd.
I believe. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks everyone, and see you for our February training in a few weeks. Bye.
Bye.